that, I'm going to hand it off to our host, Mark Anderson.
Hi, my name is Mark Anderson. I am the current Spokane Poet Laureate, and I'm going to be our moderator this evening, day. These are our panelists. I thought I'd start off with a simple, easy question. What's it like to be a writer in Spokane in the year 2018?
Okay. Everyone, all the introverts just looked at me. Being a writer in Spokane in 2018, I think, is really exciting. I think our lit scene just keeps growing and growing and getting bigger and bigger. And especially for me, being a performance poet, the venues for me to perform in keep growing. It seems like every month there's like a new event that someone's come up with to feature performance poets, which is really, really exciting. And I also host a poetry open mic, Broken Mic, which is every Wednesday evening at Nido Burrito, and we'll be a part of Get Lit this week. And I have the opportunity to pay local and out-of-town authors to perform, and I have more and more people to come feature, it seems, all the time, so that's really exciting too.
I would say I really love the collaborative nature of the writing community here. I feel like everyone is very open to helping each other out as writers, or even in terms of projects, collaborating with other organizations or cross-genre stuff. I've really enjoyed, just as a poet myself, having people willing to read my work and give me feedback, willing to form book groups so that we can discuss and kind of grow together. I think that sometimes there can be among writers like this competition or this need of I've got to be the best or whatever. And what I really like here is everyone's very humble and willing to put themselves out there. And I really appreciate getting to work with almost everyone at this table on something that we collaborated on or sharing work. So I just feel like it's very supportive as an environment, and in other cities that I've lived in, I have not found that to be true. So I really appreciate that about Spokane.
I feel the writing in Spokane is natural. From the origin of Spokane's rise to fame in the world, in terms of recognition, you had Expo 74. And I feel that's just part of our roots as writers. You take something like Expo 74, where we had the whole world's eyes on us. Annually we had Bloomsday and Hoop Fest. I feel as writing, it was just another way of being a spoken night. With the individual World Poetry Slam coming here not once but twice, and us sending a national team each of the last 9 years to nationals to represent this city. I feel it's just the Spokane way to, start small, to have it where people may not think of us as being up-and-comers, but to surprise many. And I see talent all throughout this city flourishing, and it hasn't happened in just the last 10 years. It slowly has risen, kind of like how Expo, that didn't just happen overnight. It was, a project that was in mind. It was an idea of possibilities that could come. And as time expanded, so did the dream that was fulfilled in Expo. So Spokane is just a place where you could dream big, and you don't have to leave in order for that to flourish.
Yeah, I think that I like that idea of kind of starting small and then building. I think over the last 10 or 15 years, we've really seen that in Spokane, in that, a lot of the Spokane's talent kind of has traditionally left town for greener pastures in the bigger cities, Seattle or Portland. I know when I was in, high school, in an unnamed decade in Spokane, everybody's dream was to get out, right? Was to leave Spokane so that you could really do something, right? Spokane wasn't the kind of town where things happened. The World Poetry Slam finals didn't happen here. We didn't send teams to things like that. Best-selling novelists did not live in Spokane. Jess did, but none of us knew that. So seeing how it has grown over the years, from this kind of small, non-existent thing to where it is now, where people are moving here, right, to be part of this art community, to be part of this writing community, because of the things that everyone has said. It's supportive, which is so unusual, to be able to, walk into Broken Mike and everybody's cheering and clapping for you, and you kind of go to other SPS events and go to Spark Central. Everybody's rooting for you all the time, and that's incredibly rare. So I'm glad that we've kind of kept that character as the community has continued to develop. We can sit here with Shawn Vestal, and he's nice to us.
Well, you're nice to me. Yeah, I would just second everything that everybody has said here. I mean, I came here almost 20 years ago, and I feel like the baseline attitude of young creative people at the time, in my impression then, was got to get to Seattle or Portland. That was always everybody's eye was on that goal. And that's changed a lot. One of the reasons is sort of practical and not very kind of fun and cool and creative, but it's just the economy has changed. Those cities have gotten fuller, harder to live in. Spokane has remained cheaper and easier to live in. But for whatever all of that has added up, it's just a super vibrant cultural time now. And I've been thinking about, what does that mean to have a community? Because it's such a solitary thing to write. At the end of the day, when you're in that moment where you create whatever it is and determine however good it's going to be, you're really all by yourself. And so the community is important in ways that are sometimes hard to figure out. I mean, one of my favorite experiences in Spokane was the Uncharted event last year. Was it last year?
That was last year, yeah.
And Mark and I were among a group of artists that worked with the symphony to do our own thing in sort of conjunction with a symphony performance. And it was really weird in the best way, and sort of brought together a fiction writer and a poet and a hip-hop dancer and an aerialist, and just all these really interesting creative people to try to work in one little zone, one little creative zone. And what it produced was something that we couldn't have predicted or defined at the front end, but it was unique and thrilling, and at least to be a part of it on stage. I hope people in the audience enjoyed it too. But I think that there's kind of a metaphor for the writing community in the way that we affect each other and bounce off of each other and support each other, and then the result is something that you can't really predict, but that is very tangible and potent when it happens.
Yeah, that's a great lead-in to my next question. All of the people here, in addition to just being writers, they also have some way in which they help build the community, help promote writing in some way. How do you balance the writing with the more external, extroverted portions of either like performing or organizing shows and readings or whatnot? How do you find the balance between those things?
I'll stay.
Someone has an answer, right?
I have to be really careful to protect my writing time, because since I've become an arts organizer, like I'll inherently just like, my brain will kind of put those things first, like, cool, what's happening with Broken Mike this week? Like, are we getting enough money to pay our features? Who do we want to have feature at the next thing? And when I'm at poetry events, I'm usually kind of in networking mode and less in like just like receiving art mode. So I've had to like start like tracking how often I write and make sure that like if I'm not writing every day, that I'm writing at least like multiple times a week on just my own stuff, and that I may or may not show to anyone, but just to like keep my own wheels greased. Because sometimes I think if you're an organizer or a teacher, you really care about the community that you're serving, and so you kind of forget to put yourself first, which I think is also just like a really Spokane thing, to kind of fall into that. So yeah.
It's very difficult for me. I would say. And maybe that's why everyone got silent when the question was asked.
No one's right.
I have gotten better at it. It is just, it's really challenging to work full-time. And I see a lot of young people in the audience. Savor your youth when you're free. Because I feel like I did not always use my time well when I was younger, and began writing. And now I wish I could go back in time and have all that time. But so for me, and I said this at an event with Mark and Todd Marshall, and the room kind of gasped, but it's true. I set a timer. That is the only way I have time to write. This morning, I had 10 minutes because I had a morning appointment, and I was I got behind on my work from last week, and so I was if I'm gonna write, I have to just set a timer, and sometimes it's 2 hours in the morning that I have. Sometimes it's a half an hour, sometimes it's an hour, sometimes it's 10 minutes. And for that 10 minutes, I just go, hey Siri, set the timer for 10 minutes, and then I drop the phone and run upstairs and start writing. And when the timer goes off, I come back down and go on. But it's actually quite liberating because I'm always worrying about everything. Did I remember to do that? And I got to call this person, and I got to follow up on that meeting. And there's all this stuff floating around my head. But when the timer's going, it's I know there's for at least whatever till that timer goes off. I have nothing else to worry about. But it is frustrating when you get going on something and then you have to stop and go to work, which that's life. Boo-hoo. But I do wish that that I had more unfettered time when I could just, because I feel like my progress on writing is sometimes start-stop, and then, but, that's also the rhythm of life, so.
Yeah, I really thought when I became a teacher that I would have all this time, right? Teachers, because it sounds so great. I mean, you get summers off. And then you're doing professional development workshops, and you're developing your classes for the fall, and you're writing this article, and I mean that summer actually fills up pretty immediately. So being protective, I think, of that time, and being able to use it when you get it has been really valuable to me. And it was a lesson, again, I didn't learn until pretty late either. I tend to maybe overdo whatever I'm doing. So if a job might take 8 hours, I might take 12 hours and do it, a couple of times to make sure I get it right or whatever. And so I've just had to be very careful about not doing that and saying, okay, I have this position because I'm a writer. That's what I'm paid to teach others to write, or to design, or to do whatever it is I'm teaching. And so I should probably still do that myself. And I found that helps. So having a routine, I'm not as good with the free 10 minutes, but if I have, so I set aside blocks of time for myself, either in the summer or during the school year. It varies, but and usually I can't, my attention span is short enough, I can't do anything for really more than an hour. So I write for an hour, and then I go do something else, and I come back and I write for another hour, and then I'm pretty much blown for the day, as far as that goes. But knowing that I have that time, I can turn off the lesson planning, the lecture notes, the reading and research preparation, and the calling this person back and following up on this and making sure we have this issue taken care of, or this issue taken care of, or money for this. And I do it at the beginning of the day, so it's not at the end of I used to be like, oh, I'm a night owl. I'm a young person. I can stay up late. I'm not a young person anymore, and I can't stay up late. And I found that by the end of the day, whatever I was doing that day and whatever I needed to do the next day intruded on everything else. So I do it first thing in the morning, before that intrusion has happened. So, but you really have to work at that. I mean, it's a hard routine to figure out.
And I think the routine question, like all my life as a writer, I sort of looked for the answer. Like, what's the way to do it? And there is not a way to do it, you know. Everybody does it in different ways, and the more writers you meet and talk to, the more you find out that what you have to do is figure out your own way, and that can be a little bit of a challenge. But to me, it boils down to thinking about the time of day. That's very important to me. Like, I similarly used to think of myself as a night owl who wrote at night, and I still am kind of a night owl, but I can't write at night anymore. My imaginative energy is just gone. I need to write, ideally, first thing, whenever that is. Ideally, I would sleep until 10 in the morning, get up casually. Anyway, that's not the way it works. But before life gets in the way, that's when I like to write. I also used to feel like you had to write every day, and I don't feel that anymore because I don't have any fear that I'm going to stop writing. And I think maybe I thought, how will I ever? And so now for me, it's much more productive to have a couple of days where I know I'm going to have some blocked out time to work, and then some days before that I don't work. Some days before that when I'm thinking about what I wrote, it's like hopping between islands a little bit. So I have that day, and then I think about it for a couple of days, and then I come back, ideally, when it's working right, kind of ready to go, instead of like, oh, what do I do now? You know, I'm in the middle of some situation. Somebody jumped off a cliff. What's going to happen to them?
I really relate to that. Like, you have like your little burst days, and then like days where you're just kind of like ruminating on that, like maybe it's like one line
Right.
or like the next thing that you have to connect. That makes sense
And
to
so
me a
much
lot.
of it is that. So much, for me,
Yeah.
so much is what happens when I'm not writing and I'm thinking about
Yeah.
the writing.
I feel when you miss something, you value it even more. So, you know, like a relationship or, you know, a mother or father who you haven't seen in a while, or a best friend. You seem to truly enjoy the moment, value their existence more when you haven't seen them in a while. So, you know, I know that life, you know, we deal with tribulations and, you know, we have an abundance of obligations that we must attend to. But, you know, when we do have free time, I feel the juices that have accumulated just release. And I feel like we just get on these creative streets where it just all pours out in front of you. And you're not worried about necessarily if it's going to be precise or if it's going to be great. It's just amazed that you're not in a writer's block. Because I feel when you rush things, you kind of put yourself in this block of, you know, I have to write at this time. If I don't, I'm never going to write. And I don't think you're able to genuinely produce great material. Myself personally, everybody operates differently. But my way of writing is when I do have free time and I can write, it will come. If it's meant to be, destiny will fulfill that. If not, you got to go with the punches and hope that you get to come back to a time when you can write and that you can seize the moment. And I feel that's life as a whole. Not every day is things going to go precise for you. It's not always going to go great, but it's a matter of knowing that when that moment comes again, you realize that you're there. And it could be as simple as writing, or it could be performing, or, you know, an interview or a speech or anything. So I feel writing, you know, it's something that you miss and you seize that moment or you don't. You know, either way, it's breathing, it's embedded into you.
To piggyback on that, I would say that one of my favorite, I read Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg, and I really liked how she uses meditation as a metaphor for writing practice, because, you know, so often, especially when I was young, I thought, like, I need to just sit down and, like, the brilliance will flow onto the page, and, you know, and so much of writing is just that commitment to keep doing it, even when, you know, you may not be good at it or you don't like what you're writing, but eventually that kind of awesome, like, flow will happen. So, and the incubation. So it's really, I like thinking of writing as a relationship with my mind, which is why I try to do it as often as I can and make time for it, because when you think about it, if the more you're aware of what's going on in your head, or you start thinking about the way things could be or what's going to happen to your characters, like, you're kind of like, it's almost like a relationship with yourself in this weird kind of way that you want to contribute to the relationship by keeping that pen going. So yeah, I liked what you said about breathing, and it's kind of this natural rhythm of, mental thought to paper that you have to keep picking at.
And I'll add one more thing, which is what's hard for me, and I feel like a bad poet all the time because poetry isn't the only thing I'm passionate about. There are those people who have like their one thing, and that is like the thing, and that is the thing they have to do. And I have like 10 of those. I'm also an activist, so I'm really heavily involved with the Peace and Justice Action League, and sometimes I like want to just spend like 6 hours on like a random visual art project, and I don't really consider myself a visual artist. It's just something I have to do sometimes. Or like I'm a crafter, and I like to read, and I like Netflix, and there's all these things like competing all the time. And I like the idea of like, like when you said like you set out your 10 minutes or your hour that like nothing else gets in. And I think I find myself having to do that with like all of my interests, and like forgive myself when I have a day where I'm like, I really want to like knit and finger paint today, and like the poem's just gonna have to incubate for a while. And I actually read that Albert Einstein, when he'd get really, really stuck on an equation, he also played the violin apparently. And that's how he would like use this other part of his brain for a while to rest that part that was kind of overtired, and then that's how he would figure it out. So I feel like I have like poetry, and then I have like 6 violins that I have to play sometimes. Yeah.
I think too, like letting go of the idea of like, because that time is so limited, like I always felt like whatever I produced in those hours had to be like
Perfect.
golden.
Yeah.
Right? Like this had to be spot on because I'm working with limited resources, so it had to be. But really, like that time adds up. So like I don't have to produce all the good poems I'm ever going to produce in these 2 hours, right? And that sometimes, like sitting there, my 2 hours of writing time looks like, 1,000 words of garbage. That even as I'm writing it, I know it's garbage. Like none of this is going to make it into the draft of anything that I will ever show a human being, right? But then at the end, I might hit on like 10 good words, right? Maybe 2 lines, and then the dinger goes off. And it's time to be a person again. But I've got those 10 words, right? And sometimes it's 2 weeks before I get those 10 words. Like being bad at something is part of the process of being good at something. And it's hard for me to to acknowledge that sometimes because I want it to be good all the time. Not just because I've only got 2 hours to work on it or an hour or 10 minutes to work on it. Because I just want it to be good, I want it to work, but not working is really a vital part of that process, right? Sometimes you have to see all the ways it's wrong in order to see the right way, right?
Like Thom was saying, it can be quite draining when you do fail, but that's part of it. I've done slams where I'll rush things. And I won't have it memorized, and I'll go out and perform it, and I call it struggle bars. When you try to make something rhyme, and it's not meant to be, and it's like, why did you write this? Because you were in a time crunch, and your audience could see that. Like you got to be genuine with your audience. They could read that, and I feel every time that I've ever lost a slam is because I rushed something, and it's because I didn't genuinely feel it in my heart and my soul that it was precise and that it was ready to be performed and memorized. And I feel if you take your time and you come back to it, similar to what Thom said, it could take you 2 weeks for 10 words to come out. Do it because you want that to be milk and honey. You want that to be beautiful. And I feel a lot of great artists, they'll take months and years to craft something, and that's okay. I would much rather take years to craft something than know that year was better spent than knowing that I'm going through that year unsatisfied with what I release. That will live with you eternity. So time is short, but time is valuable, so make it count.
So Twahan, we keep mentioning the poetry slam. Could you explain briefly, for those who don't know what a poetry slam is, what it is?
So Poetry Slam was originated in Chicago, Illinois, and back in the late 70s, early 80s, late 70s. Either way,
1980s.
Chicago, 1980s, Chicago, Illinois, and it consists of poets who gather an audience and enthusiasts of poetry, and they perform the poems, and they're judged on scores or judged by crowd reaction. Here in Spokane, we have 2 slams. One is called Boot Slam, and that's usually hosted by Devin Devine. And there you have 5 scores, and your 5 judges randomly selected score you from a score of 1 to 10. And the 2 and the 3 middle scores are your official score. We get rid of the top one and the bottom one. Whereas at Spokane Poetry Slam, it's all off of crowd noise. So it's like a tournament. You have 2 poets compete, one after the other, and the crowd decides who should advance to the next round until there's one winner. So
And then there's Funyuns.
yes, and Funyuns. Funyuns is our tradition. If you
Grand
win,
prize.
you get to go home with your breath smelling like onions, and it's the most amazing
And also
feeling in the
$50.
world. Yeah,
Yeah.
$50, that don't matter.
But
The
the Funyuns.
bag, you can buy a 50
Funyuns
bag
are
of
really
Funyuns.
important.
And it is a great little thing. I recommend each and every last one of you, if you're a writer or just enthusiast of writing, obviously you're here. Go to, not just the slams, but go to Broken Mic. I feel you should never just start in slams, because I feel you should learn the culture of the city that you're in. Learn your community. Learn who has become your slam champions, or just the former writers who may not be with us today. Learn of the history, because I feel you'll become more comfortable and you'll become more passionate. And so I advise you to go check out Broken Mic, hosted by Fitz Fitzpatrick over here, or go and check out 3 Minute Mic, hosted by Chris Cook. He's hilarious. Get to know, or Power to the Poetry Slam, which is another up-and-coming slam. Like I believe it was Mark was saying, there's so much innovation in the scene of poetry that is happening, and Power to the Poetry is one of those that came out of nowhere and created a new platform for up-and-coming writers. So
Yeah, I'll add to that so originally, Slam was just a gimmick to get people to just come watch a poetry show, and now it's like turned into kind of a real thing, which is absurd, but also cool. So it's a great thing to just go and watch, because that was kind of the original point, was that we wanted to get people to come watch poems for 2 hours. So just going to one and watching a few times is really, really fun. And then it's like, oh my God, there's an audience member we don't recognize. This is amazing.
My next question, I was wondering, how does Spokane appear in your writing? Do you ever write about Spokane landmarks, or is there anything in the just like atmosphere of Spokane that influences your writing?
downtown. I think downtown, without a doubt, is the heart of Spokane, not just because of Riverfront Park, but you see all the economic ways of life in this community. They all intertwine downtown. You can't escape the reality when you're downtown. It is forced to see various aspects, the beauty and the ugly, and that's everywhere you go. Every city has its good and bad. But downtown Spokane, you get to see the history, such as Expo 74. So many events happen in that area, but people who are tourists are forced to see, things that we can improve on as well. And I love that. You can find beauty in, the most ugliest things. And, I feel that's Spokane at times. But as far as that, you have such historical things as the Garland Theater. You have Market Street and Sprague. So many things are being renovated. But there's a city where local establishments can flourish, while bigger businesses could come in and do what big business does. Not going in that, but so I love it. It's a beautiful city, and as long as we don't lose that, our heart, our local, friendliness. A lot of people say we're friendly here. When I moved here, I realized people were quite friendly here. As long as we don't lose that, I think Spokane will always be Spokane. Go to the Garland, go to, the Magic Lantern, go eat a burger if you're not a vegan or a vegetarian, or vegan. Go eat a burger at Dick's Hamburgers, go to Frank's Diner, go and see what the city has to offer, because there's pure magic here in Spokane. Just got to look for it.
I write a lot about, I've written, I think the river shows up in my poems a lot, because that's like, especially the Suspension Bridge in Riverfront Park, that's a spot that's been like just really special to me. And since I was born and raised here, so it's really hard for me to write about my life without writing about Spokane. Like when I write about like the period of my life mostly like influenced by alcohol, I'm also writing about Brown's Edition, because that's where I lived. You know, or I'm writing about, like right now I'm working on a poem about Spokane kind of slowly getting gentrified, and so I'm writing about West Central, and I'm writing about Kendall Yards, and I'm writing about downtown, because this is the place where I live, and it surrounds me, and so I care about it. I worked with the homeless for a few years, so I find myself coming back to that topic of like what it's like to be a homeless person in Spokane over and over again, as I myself have also been homeless in this city. And it's a weird city to experience that. Our homeless population is really, really visible. And especially if you live downtown, like there are people who are very, very rich and people who are sleeping outside, and we're all kind of together. So I get a lot of, I don't want to say fuel from that, but just like I have to process that a lot, and poetry is how I process things. So.
Yeah, I mean, when I was poet laureate, I hate saying that.
No, it's the greatest.
Before I was dethroned.
Yes, before Mark stole my crown. And Laura, I suppose, stole it first. I mean, same as, these two, like I was writing about Spokane constantly. I live in West Central. I live on a street called Bridge. I live on the West Central side. Directly across the street is the Kendall Yards side. And that really, there's a whole manuscript about that tension, right? That divide that the street I live on represents, because it's real. And like Twahan said, like that's Spokane right there. I think in one of his books, Jess says the great thing about Spokane is you're never more than like 5 blocks from a neighborhood of mansions, and you're never more than 5 blocks from just a real ghetto, right? Like a place where like you walk through it and you're like, oh boy. And that's what I love about Spokane. I mean, writers thrive on conflict of all different kinds, right? That conflict between the beautiful and the ugly, or between the rich and the poor. These are useful tensions for writers and artists of all kind. And I think Spokane embodies those tensions really visibly most of the time. We've got we've got industrial parts of town, and we've got high drive, and they're not that far apart really compared to a lot of cities. So I think in that way Spokane has been really inspirational, and imagery like the river really lends itself to all kinds of different art. The paintings that are up at Spark Central, the river series, and which spawned a book of poems. So I think the imagery here and those kinds of tensions are, even if they don't show it manifestly, like if I'm not talking directly about the Spokane River, or about the Monroe Street Bridge, or about a particular place, I still, kind of having lived here for most of my life, those tensions are what fuel my work no matter what I'm writing about. So, after I wrote, there's a whole book of those, and I was like, okay, can I not write about Spokane for a while? And I couldn't, but then I finally did. But even in the poems where I'm not expressly or intentionally writing about Spokane, it keeps coming back in, right? You can't get rid of it. It's just there. It's what my imagination is made out of. So that's what I do.
I haven't written much that is explicitly set in Spokane, and I think that's because I tend to write from years back in my past, maybe. So I've written more about Idaho, where I grew up, and I have written some short stories that are set in Spokane, but I feel like maybe I'll write about Spokane more as I you get older or something. As my experiences here recede a little bit and then come back to me. I feel like that's what has to happen. You almost have to forget things and then revisit them. At least I do, to start treating your own life as fictional sort of fodder. I did write a short story set that was set during the windstorm, when the wind knocked out the power all over, not all over, but in certain parts of town. But that was really more just, I was quite moved by what it was like to go around on the South Hill in those dark neighborhoods.
That was crazy.
Yeah, at night, and I started making a point of doing it. Like, we were among the lucky folks. We lost power, but we also rented a hotel. You know, we had the means to do that, to put ourselves up in a hotel. But I would say goodbye to my wife and son and say, I better go make sure everything's okay at the house and check on the cats. I spent a couple of nights in this house with the cats because I see now that I've just gotten way off the subject. But
No,
but
continue.
that,
It's a great
that was so cool to me, to go up into those neighborhoods with no light, with no power, and in a car, and you turn a corner and you come across a big tree laying across the middle of the. It was like some kind of wild experience. And I would go to the house, and the cats would cuddle up around me, and I'd pile myself up with blankets, and I would be like, "Why am I doing this? Why am I?" So that's what I write. I think I tend to write more about what I don't understand about myself than I do about place and geography. Although place is always there, but I think for a lot of writers, place is really prominent in a way that, for some reason, for me, it isn't quite as prominent. I get there, it's there, I get around to it, and at the end of the day, I'm like, hey, look, what I did was I wrote about place. But at the start, I'm not thinking about place usually. I'm thinking about what a weirdo I am, and how do you make something kind of better out of this weirdness?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I tend to focus on, in my writing, internal landscapes, and also I've been writing a lot about space and physics and that sort of thing, which doesn't really have a set place. But yeah, and I was raised in Yakima, so I feel, and lately I've been writing what I would call childhood/Yakima poems. But I feel like I feel at home in Spokane in a way I never felt at home in Yakima, so I can write about Yakima with a kind of richness that there's no conflict for me, I guess, in Spokane, so there's not like meat to fodder for writing for me here, I guess, but at least not now in my life. But maybe there will be someday. And Yakima is a desert, and so what I appreciate about Spokane is the river. And that has come up in my poems a few times, rivers. But then my name is Brooke, so but I've always been fascinated with water and marine life and rivers, anything with water, just because I was never around it as a child, so it feels like this magical thing.
So you're saying a little bit about how you find your topics of like water and like things that you're either deprived of or things that drive conflict in life. What other, how do you find your topics for writing in other ways? Like what other ways do topics to write about pop into your head?
I tend to get obsessed. And maybe that's a writer thing, but like I'll get onto something and then I just can't let it go. Like for about 3 years straight, I've been reading nothing but and listening to nothing but science podcasts and reading science books and listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson's Star Talk Radio. It's awesome. Everybody check it out. So I just kind of geek out on things and I'll go a mile deep before I'm ready to look at anything else. So now I'm starting to look at Yakima and my childhood, and motifs are emerging from that. So, yeah, I tend to get fixated. So I love going to writing workshops because it kind of breaks me out of that and forces me to try something new. And then I have a bowl of words on my desk that I'll just kind of grab some and throw them on the table and think about what I associate with them and then just go. So, yeah, there's not really a method to the madness, but
That's pretty methodical. Bowl of words is, yeah. I'm like, that's a great idea.
Makes me feel jelly beans.
Yeah, oh my jelly beans. I'm lucky, I guess, to be in like my totally tumultuous 20s. I started writing poems more consistently, like as a teenager and as a young adult, like just because like terrible things were happening to me, and I just like really needed a way to process them in a healthy way. And so that was just how my poems started. So I love the idea that like my life is gonna calm down in terms of just like lots of stuff happening and lots of like, I don't know, like I'm a person who lives with mental illness and trauma, so that's just like, I feel like when I know I'll never be done writing about those things, but I find like when things are calm, I start doing prompts and things like that to write. But for the most part, I'll just stream of consciousness, like journal for like 2 pages, and I'll usually find something that needs a poem. Or just like find a line I find interesting. So I'm usually just minding my own brain, and I'm looking forward to a time where where I'm not having to mind my own stuff anymore, because I won't have as much to process, and so that I can just geek out on things, because that sounds like way less stressful than like having your life be really stressful.
I think what ends up happening for me though is kind of the same thing. Like I like how you said that, minding your own brain. Like I feel like that happens. I just use the space stuff to kind of, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I find like I can't, if things are really intense in my life, then I can't write fiction at all, and I can only write poems. And when things calm down, that's when I can like actually like imagine new stories and conflicts, because my life isn't so full of it. Yeah.
For me, influence comes from a lot of music, various genres. I feel music as a whole, when you strip away all the instrumentals, all it is a cappella. It's all poetry, the use of metaphors and similes, doesn't matter what genre. I feel like there's never a genre that you could say that you don't like. I feel when you look at the mainstream, it's like a surface. And in order for you to find the true treasures, like in our own world itself, you got to dig deep. You got to find it in the history. You got to find it in, what's not present. And I feel there's always going to be an artist, no matter what genre, that relates to what you're going through or what you feel in terms of joy or pain and suffering. And as a kid, I remember when I met one of my best friends, Dylan Murray, and heavy metal, guy, black hair, and me, I grew up just rhyming, rapping, and he turned me on to a lot of different metal bands. And what we would do, we used to come downtown, he'd come with his amp and his guitar, and I would just freestyle. And like, we didn't have money to go to camp. We didn't have, our parental situations weren't the best. So we would come downtown and just I would freestyle, and he would just jam on his guitar. Or if he didn't want to carry his amp, bring his acoustic, and we get some change and go get whammies at Dick's. And it was like, are we going to ride the bus home? Back when it was $1 to ride the bus, and now it's way more than that. But we would walk all the way back into Hilliard, and that's what we did as jam. So I feel music is a big influence, whether it's something that you're used to or not. Strip away all the instrumentals, just listen to the lyrics. My granddad brought me up on my favorite artist, Bill Withers. And Bill Withers, pure magic, storyteller. And I feel that goes for any genre. So, yeah, music.
That also reminds me, just like, I also like read other people's poems for prompts all the time. I'll get stuck on like a particular poet or be in a particular book, and then my poems definitely like will take on like the flavor of whatever poet I'm really interested in. Because you can find like really cool lines and really cool words, and you can just steal stuff. Like that's just kind of okay in poetry, within reason. I think that's a really, and I think if you find yourself not writing, you can also ask yourself, well, am I reading? And usually one kind of follows the other.
I feel that music is like, music kind of did that for me, where it was like, I learned about a bunch of poets through music artists, Nikki Giovanni, Saul Williams, and etc. My influences through hip hop, they were influenced from poets, and then that turned me on to poets that they were influenced by, and everything became full circle. I feel no matter the outlet, it all comes full circle eventually. whether people don't want to see it as that or not. You know, like I said, some people just look at the surface and are turned away, but yeah, gotta look further.
I think a lot of fiction writers have stories that they want to tell. Like they start out thinking, oh, here's a story. And I feel like I proceed more like a poet, although poets might think I'm wrong about my distinctions here. But I often start something because a bit of language catches my attention, or maybe sometimes it's a little bit of a situation with a character, but often it has nothing to do with anything. Like I went to the 7-Eleven, I guess it was about a year ago now, and they had a big sign advertising, I don't even remember what it was, like a taquito and a pop or something, like some 99-cent junk food deal at 7-Eleven being advertised like super hot something or other, and then extra large. But from a distance, coming in, all I could see were the huge words, super hot, extra large. And I just thought, something about that I was like, I want to write a thing that has a title, super hot, extra large. Because it just seemed to fill me up with ideas in a way. Like, there's something so American in that idea, like, we're gonna sell you this super crappy, cheapest possible food we can get our hands on, but we're gonna call it the best thing ever. And it's not just large, it's extra large. It's not just hot, it's super hot. I don't know, something about it. I was just like, there's so much American hyperbole wrapped up in that. And I'm writing a story about it that has, it has nothing to do with the 7-Eleven. It's all about healthcare and people living longer and not having enough money and getting new joints and stuff. And I don't know how I got from 7-Eleven to that story. I have no idea what happened there. A similar thing happened at about the same time. I just thought of something that sounded like a title to me, like an old Ray Carver, the short story writer, Raymond Carver title.
Who's from Yakima.
From Yakima, right? Just somehow the words, please give me one good reason not to hate you, entered my mind. And I thought, that's kind of funny in a horrible way. Like, I think horrible things are funny. And so I wrote a story about a guy hiking in the mountains with people that he didn't like, but really the unlikable one was the guy. I have no idea how those two things came together. But those titles existed before the stories existed. And I wrote them prompted by the titles in some way. So, I don't know. There's mystery. There's great mystery in the way that this stuff happens. And if you're interested in it, trying to figure out ways to listen to that mystery when it doesn't make any sense to you, to me, that's important. Like, to be like, okay, I'm somehow enlivened by this language. Where do I go with that? You know, and lots of times that doesn't work. But
I think I have no idea. I have no idea where my ideas for poems come from. Especially like trying to reverse engineer. Like, oh, here's this poem. Where did that poem start? Like, what was the idea for this poem? I don't know. Like, my brain does not work in a systematic way. I'm much more like Fitz. I have 15 violins going at the same time, and occasionally one gets louder than the other. And that's kind of how imagery works in my head, in that, like you'd think, like as a poet, it would be the language that I start with, but it's always the image. I just got back from a trip, and people keep asking me, how was the trip? And what I really want to say is I was on a train one day between Bristol and Oxford. I think it was that day. And you're going past all this like beautiful scenic English countryside, and there's sheep and there's mist and rain, and I'm looking out the window and there's these stacks. They've got a nuclear facility, and it's so close to the train tracks. I mean, you can see it really close. And there's 5 stacks in this facility, And maybe you've seen pictures of nuclear facilities with these great big kind of like flower vase looking things. And that's what I remember. That's how that trip was, is the image of these 5 nuclear facility stacks juxtaposed with the rain and the sheep and the English countryside. And I don't know what I'm going to do with that, but that's floating around in my head, kind of like that language. Like, I don't know what it's for, and that's my writing process, is just looking at things and seeing the weird things, and then they come out and there's a poem later. So I wish I was more methodical, or that I had the attention span to like be really like concerned and into something for 3 years, or to dig even the 3 miles deep to get to, like, I can get about 10 feet down and I'm like, ooh, what's that? And that's my process. So it's just kind of like bing, 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 and then suddenly there's a poem.
I like that that metaphor of just like the poem, like just being 3 miles down or 10 feet down, like, and it's like you just have to keep digging till like all of a sudden, bing, 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 there it is.
Right.
It's like drilling for water. It might take
Yeah, exactly.
might take you a little time, might take you a long time.
And there's no way of knowing. So, what sort of advice for people trying to dig their way to the poem or the novel or the story for their first time, what sort of advice would you have for them?
Practice non-judgment of yourself, because I can't remember who told me this. Maybe it was Tom. I don't know. Someone told me that like first drafts are always crappy. So if you just treat everything you start like, okay, it's gonna be crappy, so I don't have to worry about it, and then just like get out of your own way and just get words on the page. Like, just start by getting words on the page, and then find the thing that's interesting or that you like or that you want to explore further, and then just start with exploring it. Don't worry about making things good until later. Because you may never think it's good. That could also happen. Or someone else may think it's good and you may not, or vice versa. Yeah.
Relax. You're alive. You know, the worst that could happen is either people are going to admire you or they're going to not. Each and every one of us have a defense mechanism when we see each other, and we either think positive or we don't. That's life. Know that you're going to live. You're going to wake up tomorrow. Count your blessings on that. Hopefully that you'll wake up tomorrow and that you'll be gifted another day to do what you love. So breathe. Know that as long as you love you, as long as you love what you do, everything else should come into fruition. But don't run from it. You don't want to look back 40 years and be like, I could have done this. I could have done that. But no, I was scared, and then you kind of became complacent, and something that you didn't seem was ideal or unsatisfying. So relax and take risk. Take risk early and take risk a lot.
I tell my students that I'm happy to accept their tuition money, but really they need to do 2 things. They need to read more and they need to write more. And pretty much that's what my classes are. Read a bunch of stuff you didn't know existed. And then write nonstop. Write, forgiving yourself and understanding that it's going to be bad, because it has to be, right? It has to be bad before it can be good. Like, nobody wakes up and is like, hey, I'm going to be a writer, and then they write a novel and they sell it for $1 million, and there's a movie and it stars all their favorite people. Like, that's not a thing.
That is a thing. I keep believing that.
Okay, well, Vestal
Don't
aside.
shatter the illusion.
Yeah, sorry.
Right.
Funny one.
We gotta believe.
But really, I mean, challenge yourself, right? I mean, you'll find writers that you love, and I have writers that I love. And if I only read those writers, like, I would only write like those writers. So, challenge yourself to discover new writers and ask people that you barely know, like, what are they reading? What are they excited about? And read that, and maybe you don't like it, but maybe you do, right? This is also, you know, as a publisher and a book designer and a writer and someone who spends all of my time thinking about books, it pains me a little bit to say this. You don't have to like every book, right? You don't have to like everything you read. Sometimes you just won't, and that's totally fine. But still challenge yourself and seek out new writing to see what people are doing, what people have done, right? And then, as Fitz said, steal everything. Steal what you can, right? That's what reading is for, is finding out these techniques that other writers have already done, right? And then you can adapt that to your own particular style, right? Don't be derivative of what they've done, but you can imitate them for a while until you figure it out and how you can make it work for yourself, right? So those two things should always be connected. Reading leads to writing, leads to reading, leads to writing.
Yeah.
You going? Am I jumping in?
No, go for it.
Butting in. I agree with what's been said here. Read a lot, write a lot. Those are the basic things. They really are. And there's almost nothing that you can get about writing anywhere better than reading great work. Pay attention to what you like, seek it out, but be open to other ideas. I guess there's a really, for me, maybe the trickiest part of being a writer sometimes is the balance between listening to critics. Now, I don't mean critics out in the world. I mean the people that you are seeking feedback from, people who are giving you good faith editorial advice. Is finding a balance between listening to those people and trusting yourself. I mean, it's very common in my experience. If you teach young writers, some go too far in either direction. Like some are like, I'm not changing anything because people don't get it. And that's a really destructive thing to do, is to set out treating yourself as unimprovable. You should treat your work as improvable. At the same time, you can't listen to everybody all the time. You can't do what everybody wants you to do. And you have to figure out a way who to listen to, when to trust yourself, how to balance these things that are competing in your mind. And very often, at some point down the road, after you've written for a while and you're getting responses from people, you will have to choose between polar opposite kinds of opinions. Cut that out, I don't like that part. Oh no, keep that, that's my favorite part. That you'll go to a workshop and you'll get both of those things and you'll have to make the decision between them. And you can make mistakes in both ways, and it's really tough to know. And it doesn't go away, by the way. I'm right in the middle of it right now with an editor who wants me to do something to a story that kind of sounds like it makes sense to me, but I'm also not sure I want to do it. I have to decide one way or the other, and I'm no better at making that decision now than I was years ago, except for I've done it more now, and I'm a little more used to it, I guess.
Yeah, that actually recently happened to me. I got a poem accepted in a journal, and but I had sent it like months ago, and then they were like, "Oh, we're accepting it." And I said, "Well, I've revised it since. Here's the revisions." And they were like, "Ooh, we did not like those revisions." So I was like, "Okay." So we ended up meeting in the middle, where I kept some of the original, but it was interesting because someone had told me to alter it, so I did, and then they argued why I should keep it, and they were both valid points, but I just had to decide in the end what was gonna work. I think my only advice would kind of echo Fitz in the non-judgment category, but I would phrase it as play, because I feel like if you take yourself too seriously and you feel like you have to produce this opus or you have to have a fully formed poem every time you sit down, that is really it just puts so much pressure on yourself and it destroys your creativity. So this is the idea of play. In fact, some of the best, well, I feel like my favorite poems that I have written have come out of just nonsensical writing that eventually started making some sense, and then, created these poems that I really love and other people really love. So, just give yourself the freedom to play and don't feel like you have to have a fully formed idea when you sit down. In fact, I feel like that's sometimes can be like kind of like your title. You've got a vague idea and then you run with it, and maybe you end up in, a totally different place than what you started with. But don't put too much pressure on yourself to create this perfect thing in your brain, because it won't be perfect.
Always improvable. I think that's a great note to end on here. One more thanks to Get Lit for putting this on.